Right, continuing with that story, let's get reaction now on the DA's proposal and the current electricity crisis. We've got political analyst Dirk Kotze, who joins us now virtually. Mr. Kotze, thank you very much for your time here on eNCA. Prof, I just want to start with this plan that the DA announced today. John Steenhuisen saying the first thing that he would do is dissolve that energy crisis committee, which of course we know the president only established back in July and is supposed to be headed by his DG. Do you agree that that was the incorrect move by the president?
I won't say incorrect, but it's certainly not working. And there's at the same time also the Interministerial Committee on Electricity, which is chaired by the Deputy President. And I think this is really where our focus should be at this stage. The Crisis Committee is more of an operational, where the different officials are there, but it goes beyond that. It is now about what is being done by government itself at the highest level, and because ultimately policy decisions will have to be taken over and above the electricity plan that President Ramaphosa announced earlier on, and also how it must be implemented. And what many people are saying is that a lot of it is still stuck at the level of national departments and approvals that must be made. And I think this is where the Interministerial Committee is absolutely of critical importance. And I think what we have heard, that President Ramaphosa is coming back to South Africa, is in a sense an indictment on this committee, that they are not doing the work that they are supposed to be doing.
To a point where the president has to, come back from a bilateral meeting that would also be quite important for our country with President Joe Biden. So I do agree with you in terms of the fact that it's an indictment on them. But what do you also think, Prof, of the executive of Eskom and the board thereof?
Well, it's very difficult to know what happens within it. You know, we have very elaborate and informative briefings. Yesterday or on Sunday, they provided a very comprehensive briefing, which is very different from the past. At least we have some insight now into what are the considerations, what's even some of the operational matters that they are dealing with. And we are not, to use now this expression, in the dark about this. So in that sense, they communicate much better with the public. But I think there's a lot of a sense of they don't have all the cooperation that's necessary at the ground level, at the level of the power plants, that there's this interruptions and the trips that happen there. First of all, was presented as a form of sabotage that's involved in it. Now it's not exactly clear what is it. Some would say it's a lack of maintenance also. But I think the South African public in general feels that there's more to be done to this, even if they work in an optimal sense, is that Eskom itself must go now beyond trying to just simply repair the big power stations and move quicker into alternative modes of providing of electricity. Because we know that these power plants have become highly unreliable. Yeah. But that cannot be the future for us, that we simply have to accept that. It has to be that they will have to look at a very sort of immediate stage almost, about what are alternatives that they can get from other parts of the world, that they can import, that they can borrow from other areas, whether it is these power ships or whether it is from electricity from neighboring countries or whatever else. But I think this is what we would like to, what we need to see at this stage.
And I mean, Prof, looking at the fact that you're hearing, for instance, from the MMC, Michael Son here in Johannesburg, saying that he believes that by December, IPPs would have already been brought on board by the city of Johannesburg, and that residents in this city will start feeling a difference even when load shedding is implemented. The fact that in the Western Cape they've sort of won that battle, or they're on their way to completely winning it. Is it fair to say MMC Michael Son might be, too optimistic, or too, his goals might be too tight in terms of meeting this demand by December? Is it fair to think that, or should we be positive in Johannesburg and think by December his promise will actually be met?
Well, I think he made this public promise, and we will have to keep him to that. And I think that put pressure on the local government, the metro government in Johannesburg. Certainly in Cape Town, they have the advantage that they have hydroelectricity also. But Johannesburg do have decommissioned power stations that they've started to use. The same applies in Tshwane. And I think that those are the type of things that must be, the pressure must be on these local authorities in order to be able to activate them, to commission them again, so that alternative means of electricity again can be provided even at local government level. I think what the public is doing is another initiative, and that is, I mean, how many households are now putting up solar panels or other forms of batteries within their houses that start to, not on the big scale, but on the micro scale, is starting to make a difference. And I think so there is a popular initiative, I would say, that is already happening. But at local government level, there must be alternatives that they can do for example, now in Bethlehem, in the Free State, they are using some of the water that comes from the Lesotho Island scheme in order to generate hydroelectricity. So those type of local initiatives, I think, is what local authorities will have to do now.
And, you know, Prof, politically then, I would assume that the ANC government should be a bit concerned then, because two South Africans, they seem to be more interested in the elective conference that they are going to in December, discussing positions at what BGMs will come out with in terms of the top 6 this weekend, while the DA, for instance, is holding press briefings about solutions to our power crisis. We have a city of Cape Town that is sort of out of the woods. The city of Joburg, which is led by the DA, talking about taking us out of the woods, or beginning to at least, by December. So, you know, shouldn't the ANC be concerned? Because they seem to, a lot of South Africans, to be more concerned about themselves and not paying their employees, while their official opposition is actually making plans to take us out of the woods.
Yes, you are correct. But I think even in the case of the DA, and the same applies to the EFF, we expect actually more of them. They are the main opposition parties, and they should have an alternative plan for the ANC's policy in terms of the role that they must play as opposition parties. Because if they don't have a plan, they are not proper opposition. So I think it is incumbent on them, in order to present to the South African public, and not only Johannesburg and others, but that's what they are now starting to do, a very comprehensive plan for the whole of South Africa. And that must go into also the smaller places, the smaller towns, where there's certainly very much of a crisis, which might, and where they are not in the position of the metros, where they can create their own alternatives. So I think it is exceptionally important that parties like the DA, like the EFF, and the other opposition parties all present to us alternatives, because that also put pressure on the government in order to say, well, these are alternatives that we are in favor of, we are working with them, and use the good options that we are putting on the table. And that, again, although it might come from the opposition, is what can ultimately assist the government in terms of, in the short term, of providing energy. So certainly this is very important. From an ANC point of view, yes, I think there is the general perception almost that the ANC is not as focused on this as it should be, and it's not treated as the crisis that it should be. Some talk about that they must declare a state of disaster within the energy sector or the energy field. That hasn't happened yet. The impact on the economy, it seems like it is sort of delegated to the public in order to deal with this situation, and they don't take sort of complete ownership for that. So that is certainly, I think, some of the perceptions that exist. Also the fact that they have been hesitant for a very long time to move away from Eskom as an SOE model to one which is much more diversified, that allow for private generation of energy, as well as now the selling of private consumers, even households, that the possibility that they can sell that electricity to Eskom. These are all small options, but collectively they can make a difference ultimately.
Well, thank you very much for speaking to us, Prof. Of course, there are some civil society organizations who would disagree to the privatization of Eskom, because it might mean that those who are poor in the country have less accessibility and will suddenly not be able to afford electricity. But I don't know about you at home, but if there's a political party that, for instance, comes up with a solution to this crisis, it gives you no choice but to vote for that political party, right? Well, anyway, that was political analyst, Professor Dirk Kotze.